Welcome everyone to the Howl Podcast, where we feature individuals from various backgrounds who have captivating stories to tell. And our goal is to bring people together by sharing diverse perspectives and experiences to inspire positive change in the world. And I'm your host today, Juan Raimundo Ramos, doing a solo podcast today. And we're going to be talking a lot about the filmmaking industry in terms of editing, post-production, VFX, and also acting from time to time. So I'm really excited to be talking to Bradford Hill, who is our guest for today, about this episode because the topics that will be discussed are also in my field of editing. So I am very curious to see what Bradford Hill has to say and has a lot of advice for the viewers and listeners. So just a little bit of intro about Bradford Hill. He's a multi-talented post-production editor, VFX artist, and narrative film actor who is a graduate of USC Film School. He also directed, edited, and acted in his own sci-fi film called Mirrored, showcasing his talents both in front of and behind the camera. So we're very excited to have Bradford Hill on the show to share his insights and experiences with us. So without further ado, please welcome Bradford Hill. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. Really appreciate it.
Yes, so for the viewers and listeners who don't know much about you or who have never worked with you in the post-production industry, just kindly introduce yourself to the world.
Well, that's open, but sure. Well, keeping it kind of, I guess, a little bit more of an in-depth synopsis, if you will, of my kind of editing or film production experience. I've been working now in video and film for over 20 years, believe it or not. And I've got credits now or experience in pretty much every aspect, both kind of in front of the camera and behind, but my career has kind of taken most all of its turns toward the post-production side. And so I started off at a company in Idaho before I went to college, with a place called Trifusion Video Graphics, and I started on a little program called Final Cut Pro version 1, and I have been editing ever since in all of the editing programs, but I went all the way through 7 through the whole debacle when everybody switched to Premiere, and then through Premiere, and then now I'm on DaVinci and Avid in there as well. So I've been through all of it along the way, and so more notable stuff I've worked on perhaps might be anybody who's kind of anime fans or fans of stuff out of Japan. I did a lot of English dubs for Ultraman, along with a lot of other anime titles and stuff, but the big ones were Ultraman. There's a few feature films, Ultraman X, Ultraman Ginga S, and Ultra Fight Victory they had on YouTube for a while, and a few of those did all the recordings and all the audio editing and mixing for the English version. Did VFX on a couple features, and then edited tons and tons of stuff. Everything from YouTube videos, TikTok videos, to actors' reels, both, the scenes as well as the montage, and all sorts of promotional stuff, and then narrative things. Worked on a pilot or two, and a short film as well, and then just edited tons and tons of scenes for my day job work. So that's kind of all over the map, but basically, from start to finish, it's been a long journey where I've gotten a chance to learn a lot along the way. Even had a stint at Disney for a while where I did a lot of 3D and learned how to edit 3D and stereoscopic and a bunch of stuff. So lots of stuff.
Love that. And what made you decide to move to Los Angeles as an editor? Was it because of being accepted in the USC, or how did that come about?
Yeah, I knew I wanted to work in movies ever since I saw Jurassic Park, pretty much. Because before that, I wanted to be a paleontologist, and then I realized, no, I'm going to bring them to life. I don't want to find the bones. And so that was what got me really focused in. I mean, I was doing acting and stuff in film at the time, but that was really kind of like, okay, this is what I'm going to do with my life. And so I applied to USC along with a handful of other places to get into their film school. And then I ended up getting into the theater school and then the film as well later. But that was what brought me out. Plus, Hollywood at the time, especially, it's a lot different now, but at the time, Hollywood was the place to go if you wanted to work in movies, and that's what got
Yeah.
me out here to start.
Yeah. Yeah, I wanted to ask about USC too because I remember watching a lot of Rocket Jump, episodes, a lot of Rocket Jump TV shows and, just shorts and stuff like that. So, things that came to mind or people that came to mind was Freddie Wong and I think his partner in the past, Brandon, I forgot, JLA or something. Were you
I was there at the time they were, yeah.
Yo,
I
you were
didn't
in the
know them
time they
though,
were.
but yeah, they were or very close from what I understand. Like I said, I didn't know them that well, but I do know a few of the people that work on their stuff, and they were actors in my theater class and or around my time. So I didn't know Freddie or any of them. I still don't, but I mean, I know that they know people I know. But I
Gotcha.
didn't know that well. So, it was a big school. But there's a lot of familiar faces in some of their stuff that I'm like, oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's him.
you know,
For sure. And speaking of the acting, you mentioned that you're also pursuing acting as opposed to editing. So, what inspired you to pursue acting? Because that's such a different field from, I guess, behind the scenes and post production editing. So, what inspired you to do that?
Well, actually, my first love and passion is acting and performing and writing and kind of doing and coming up with it and all of the in front of the camera stuff. Actually, I love being on set. That's like where I love to be the most. But coming from where I come from, which is a little tiny farming town in the middle of Idaho, there wasn't a lot of opportunity. And I did tons of community theater. I was in drama club and all that. Actually, that was, I won national championship. I won the national qualifier so the state championship, and then we got like 100 and something place out of 400 or something like that in nationals.
Wow.
So I competed in acting and did plays and all that all through school for years, and that was a lot of my passion for movies too. But if you wanted to make a movie and nobody else knew how to do it, well, I'm the kind of guy that says, well, nobody knows how to do it, I'll figure it out.
You'll do it.
That's what got me started. It's actually acting that got me started into figuring out how to make movies, because I was like, I want to make a movie and I want it to look really good. How do I do that? And so then I started studying it and getting into it a lot and looking up things, and that was what drove me down that path. And then, like my dad always said, the best way to learn anything is get a job doing it. And
There you
so
go.
I went out and I got a job doing it. And
That's awesome.
where I got that first job at Trifusion. Then it just kind of went from there. And then I always just had the two paths all along. Been pursuing them both kind of simultaneously, some more successful depending on what you're looking at than others.
And I love that. I love the fact that you have so many different talents in multiple fields. That's what I really like. And, given the fact that you worked on Mirrored, which is a project you wrote also. Oh, wait, actually you didn't write it, but you directed it. I mean, yeah, you directed it. You were an actor in it. You edited it. Talk about that. Talk about your experience working on that, considering that you worked on it in multiple different roles.
Oh yeah, that. So I did. The one thing I didn't do actually was write it. That's the only thing. Everything else pretty much. And so, in order to get as much money on screen as possible, I knew from the start that I was going to do all of the post production. And one that was to also, I knew that I could, because at this point I'd done enough audio mixing and stuff, and I'd had the luxury of studying under some, audio mixers and recording engineers in some of my previous work and internships, and I'd done a lot of graphics, and I actually got, like, at the time, one of those work from home, get your own degree kind of study at home college courses in art. So I have a background in art, and then I did all the video editing. So I knew that I could do all of it. To some extent. And then I lucked out on the VFX. I learned a ton. The director of photography on the film is a very talented VFX artist as well. Actually, that's what her bread and butter is in the daytime a lot of time. Well, I shouldn't say that. I don't know. She does a lot of VFX in the as her work as well. So she taught me a lot, got me started on Nuke and everything, and then I ran with it from there. But yeah, it's a challenge and very time consuming. Probably the biggest struggle aside from the actual filming like weeks and trying to get everybody wrangled and all of that, which was a huge learning experience. It was one of the biggest productions I had done with the biggest crew and the biggest. I mean, we built a set and we had a studio. We went all out, and so I had to wrangle carpenters and everything. And well, I helped actually. I built a lot of the set, but I had a lot of help from a lot of really great people on that. But once it got into post, it was the time that was probably the biggest stress. It's like after 7-8 months, it was like,
Wow, that long, huh?
Oh, it took like a year. It took me at least a year, I think, year and a half to finish that. And ironically, the edit didn't. The edit went by quite quickly. That was the easy part in a lot of ways, the first edit, getting the timings down. But then after that, there was one scene in there that we had a screaming fan in the parking lot for like a whole 10-minute scene or 5 minutes, whatever it turned out to be.
Oh, no.
Had to ADR the entire thing. And so getting the ADR was a whole challenge. Getting the actors back, working with them, finding an audio booth, like all of that was a challenge. Then getting it synced up, and then after that, I Foleyed the entire scene to get, which was actually kind of fun, to be honest. It was kind of like combining actor hat with audio engineer hat. Foley's a lot of fun if you've never done it, by the way. I would get these shoes. Luckily, by being kind of the costumer on the shoot too, I had all their costumes. So I got the shoes that one of the actors would wear, and then I was mimicking like his walking style to try and get the right feet while I did it in my garage because I just needed the cement. So I was down like in the middle of the night in my garage at like our apartment, which if you saw it was kind of funny because it's just like a row of garages. So I'm like hiding and like. You have to open the garage door to get in and close it behind you. So I'm like in this box, just working out there on my computer in the middle of the night, getting all the sounds, throwing myself onto the car to get like the crunching metal sound. Fight scene in the parking lot, and all of that. So that was fun but challenging and took a long time. And then that was just the sound. And then after that, then it was the VFX, and the VFX took the longest, which obviously makes sense probably if you think about it. But,
absolutely. Yeah,
I mean, from designing, because if you remember, there's like a 3D model in the beginning, so I had to design the printer and like did a bunch of drawings for that to figure out, okay, I want this to be kind of realistic. Which the fun thing actually about it, though, a lot of that's really kind of fun stuff. It's just really time consuming, but it's part of the creativity of creating a world and doing the world building, which comes along with directing and really, kind of getting to have your foot and your hands in all of that. But definitely in the future, I will have more help, especially on a feature, because it's just too, I would want the feature to be done within a decade.
Within a decade, for sure, as opposed
How
to
long I thought you would take to do it by myself.
Yeah, because it sounds like you did so many things in that particular short. And, I watched it before in the Pasadena International Film Festival. Yeah. And I was like, did Bradford make this? It looks like $5 million worth of short film. Yeah, there was so much involved in terms of VFX and, the sound design and everything. So it was so impressed by that. So I was wondering about the challenges you had to overcome. And you mentioned about, you had to do some, ADR, you had to do different things, so that's crazy to me. But, being an actor, though, in general, like what has been the biggest challenge you've faced and how did you overcome it?
From an acting perspective, I think one of the biggest challenges with acting is just getting the next job or getting the next opportunity. That's one of the biggest ones, and dealing with the rejection and dealing with the reality and having to realize that maybe you're not going to be able to pursue it in the way that traditionally nowadays is what the way to do it, which is part of why I made the choice to make the short film in the first place. Was I had been doing a lot of auditioning, getting close on a lot of stuff. I got second callbacks on some good commercials and things, and I almost had like a Ford commercial once and stuff like this. I would get close or get in the room or get like really, I almost had a feature, which fell through. I would have had a big part in a feature, but they brought me in for a chemistry read, and then the whole thing fell apart. So it's like you get all these things that are like really close, and yeah, that was a lot of the reason. Was it's like, okay, I'm gonna, again, the same idea. If no one's gonna do it, then I'll make it.
Yes.
And so that was why I wanted to make the film. But for me, it was also, and as you know, I have a very small acting role in that short, and a lot of it was because it's a multi-stage plan. It's like the short film was proof of ability, proof of like ability to produce on that level, and to showcase my skills behind it as well, to help make a really good calling card for getting future work, and also then potentially something to show to potential investors for the next project, to be like, here's how I can produce and what I can make and stuff like that. So I chose to have a much smaller acting role. One, I don't believe I fit the role of the lead. It wouldn't have been the same movie. It wasn't for me, but I knew that going in, so I had consciously chosen a smaller role. But yeah, that's one of the challenges, is kind of making your own work or finding your own way to give back to another chance to perform while you're waiting to be given that shot. Because I like to make stuff, so I really, that's the biggest challenge, I guess, if I was put it in words, is I don't like to sit around and wait to be told I have an opportunity for something. So I'd
Yes.
rather make it myself.
Absolutely, and I know a lot of actors in the industry who are essentially feeling the same way. There's just so many people competing for the same role, and yeah, it's just such a hard way to go about it, because I try to ask them, like, what's your story like? Like, how did you get into acting? How did you get into that role? And at first glance in the past, I was like, maybe acting is something that's possible for me. Maybe this is something that's easy. But then, just dealing with the realities of people, telling their stories about it,
Yeah.
it's a much harder thing to do. So yeah, thank you for sharing that, for sure.
One of the things I'll say real quick is it's unfortunate, because the nature of the business of acting, there are a lot of people who are incredibly talented actors
Yeah,
who you've never heard of.
absolutely. Never heard of.
Just the way it works, like, so many moving parts. There's 100 reasons you didn't get the job, and only one of them is your talent.
Only one of them is their talent. But okay, what would you say to those people who are just dealing with a lot of rejections, and are basically not as motivated because of what's happening?
Well, yeah. There's a quote I heard. I can't remember who said it, but it's one of those things where if you could imagine yourself doing anything but acting, do that. Because it's one. If you don't have an absolute, I have to do this kind of passion and drive, then it is one of the hardest roads you're ever going to like walk down, because the rejection is intense. The chances are incredibly slim. You have to stay positive every single time you go, even though the chances are incredibly slim. And it's just incredibly difficult. And like I said, one of the things that's so sad about it is and it's not that it's a bad thing. This is just the nature of filmmaking and art making in a nutshell. Everybody has the vision that they're trying to make. And but you may not fit that vision. Even if you're an incredibly talented person and could bring an incredibly great performance to that role, it might not be the performance that they're looking for, or you might not have the right, you might be too tall or too short or too, like, name it.
Yeah.
Like any kind of character attribute, especially on the lower end. You see all the movies of people getting all the big fancy makeup jobs to fit the role that they get cast in, but that's only once you're really big. It's like on the lower end independent stuff, they don't have the money or time for that. So the vast majority of anything you're going to go out for, if you don't fit exactly what they look for, it doesn't matter how good you are, because they'll go with someone who fits what they're looking for. And again, that's not necessarily a horrible thing. That is
Right.
the nature of making a vision, creating the world that you see. But it makes it incredibly hard, because we like to think that if we're really good at it, you'll always succeed, and unfortunately that's just not how it works.
Yeah.
So if you really love it and it's what you want to do no matter what, stick with it. keep
Absolutely.
going, and produce your own stuff.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. If it's something you're passionate about, I would say, you can tell your own stories. You can write your own script and then be the lead in it. Be
Exactly.
even the supporting actor in it. Be the something else in it. Because a few of my friends are dealing with like so many rejections as well as actors, and then they don't know where the place to go. And I think that's a pretty promising route. Even just by not necessarily like doing an entire short film. Maybe if they're just working on their acting reel or just like practicing to hone their craft, I would say just write your own stuff. Maybe that could work well for you. We'll see.
Or find someone who writes, and you can maybe dictate and they can help you write it. Like if, for instance, writing's not your talent, but you really love acting, then you can try and find other people out there, because writers are always trying to get their stuff out too. And
Yeah.
writers don't necessarily want to perform their own stuff all the time. So try to find those collaborations, try to just find a way to make something. And then more than anything, find a way to, be able to eat while you do it. Because,
Absolutely.
if you're starving, you can't be a starving artist, because it just doesn't work. That's probably the biggest thing I would say. It's like you got to find some way to make sure you can at least keep going. Persistence is probably the biggest thing. I mean, in editing, for instance, too, even though I had a lot of stuff happening, it took 10 years before I landed a really good gig.
Took a while, and you've been doing it for so long too. So yeah. Speaking of editing, what inspired you to pursue a passion in post-production? Because that's such a different field from the acting world, right? So,
Well, actually, I wouldn't say it is. That's the funny thing. I think that's why it worked out so well, is because actually, I would argue that acting is, if you're going to be an editor and you want to edit narrative, go take an acting class. Go take acting 101. Because one, that's what you're cutting all the time, is you're cutting actors. And so
True.
if you know a little bit more about what's going on, and one, how to look at it, but more than anything, it gives you a sense of rhythm and timing and the emotional connection with the material, and it opens up to what actors open up to, which is really feeling it. Because really, as an editor, you're kind of watching the performance. You're watching it like a hawk for every single
Exactly.
time, times over, right? And you got to be able to tell, like, what's the nuanced difference between the exact same word said 15 different times, or however many takes there are. Hopefully not 15, but you get my point.
Yes.
So actually, I would argue they go really hand in hand. I think me being an actor is what really helps my editing for all of those reasons: performance and pacing, and understanding the rhythm of a scene and breaking it down and trying to make that happen. So they're very, I was going to say copacetic. That's the wrong word. What's the cohabitant? No. Anyways, they feed off of each other. I can't remember the word.
Yeah, I totally get what you mean, because I remember going to film school in the past, and also the acting people from the school are also having editing classes. I was like, why do actors also have editing classes? I was like, oh, that makes sense.
No.
So that they can get the feel, they can also see themselves as well, see their performance, and even see other people's performances too, among many things. What do you think?
That can, for me, I would say seeing my own performance can be hit or miss. I mean, I've edited my own stuff several times.
Yeah.
But as an actor, it's very easy to also become hyper aware of things on yourself.
Oh yeah, that for sure.
If you worry about it too much, it's like it can be, I don't know. Some actors never watch themselves. Some actors love to watch themselves. It's like, for me personally, if I can ignore worrying about how I look all the time, if that makes sense. That's if you can get past whatever hang up you have to watch yourself, then it works out. And it is a good study to be able to see yourself and try to, see how you look outside of it. But it can be challenging on one hand, though, too. Watching others, we watch other actors all the time. I mean, every time you go to a movie, you're studying the greats and stuff like that, So watching others and seeing how they do it is always great research and practice.
Yeah. And how do you approach the process of editing either a film or a show or anything? Do you have certain techniques you usually use to kind of enhance the storytelling? Like, how do you go about it? Like, whenever you're working on like a certain project?
Great question. Yeah. Aside from the technical, where first you just get everything set up and logged, and then my approach, I watch everything. The first thing I do is just make sure to watch everything. I mean, from before, like from the minute the file starts, file nowadays instead of roll, but the minute the footage starts till all the way through, I watch all of it, start to finish. I don't start the clapper and go from there. I just watch all of it, because you want to have in your head everything you've got to work with.
That makes
then
sense.
from there, I just start with an assemble. I go from the script. I get the basics down. I've probably already made notes and marked the takes that I like the most for certain spots as I've watched everything. So that's the other thing. I kind of, if there's no circle takes, because a lot of times you don't get notes anymore. Like, you used to have really good script soups or directors that leave circle takes, and that kind of helps guide you. I'd still watch everything even if I had that, but I would start with the circle takes based on the director. If I don't have that, then I go off my own circle takes that I've gotten from watching all of it, do the assemble, and then the next step for me is get the pacing. It's forget about the footage, forget about the jump cuts, forget about anything. Get the best performance and get the pacing. And once that scene is working kind of the way you hear it, and everything is playing visually for the most part, it's working though pacing wise, like the emotion is there, the timing is right for a joke, or the timing is right for an emotional outburst, or like all the pacing is there. Then after that's done, go in and fix any visual problems. Fix jump cuts or switch stuff if you can, like flip it or do a cutaway or do whatever you have to make it work, or just find a way to really, hide it. But the pacing
afterwards,
the performance and pacing is king. So once that's done, then you move on to the polish.
Absolutely. One of the things that you mentioned that I think is incredibly underrated is watching the entire footage.
Yeah.
Just watching the whole thing, watching the dailies, because some editors I know what they do is basically they essentially log everything, they back up everything, they organize every footage, etc. But they don't really watch it. They just essentially start doing the assembly right away. They start doing the rough cut right away before even knowing what it looks like, what it sounds like, what the performances are like. So in a sense, I think it's kind of counterintuitive. If it works for some editors, then it works for them. But I think that once I started even just watching the entire dailies, everything became faster for me. Just because I know, that's the best thing. I'll take notes in that. You know what I mean? So that's such a great tip for all the editors out there. Yeah. Watch the footage.
Well, it gives you an insight into what the director was thinking too, because if you don't have those script notes, or you haven't had a chance to really talk to the director, which sometimes you don't, depending on what the project is, or some directors like you just take a crack at it before they ever really talk to you, just be like, see what you can do. Give us your 2 cents first. So it just depends, but getting to see, did they get a wide shot? Do they have this really cool insert shot? Why did they get that insert shot? Like, where does it happen? Like, what footage do you have? It lets you know the way they were seeing it, what they were trying to capture, and what you've got to play with. It's like you can't put a puzzle together if you don't have all the pieces.
Absolutely. And how do you balance your creative input with the director's vision? Because I know that, you could be both. You can be the director and editor, but knowing that you can work with different directors who obviously have different mindsets and different visions for their project, like, how do you go about that while working on the same project together?
Well, some of it, so for the most part, if you're doing something that's kind of narrative, if you know the style and the tone from a conversation with the director, or at that point, if you're confused, you have to have a conversation with the director. So you need to find kind of those things mostly. What's the tone you're looking for? What is the style you're looking for? Because nowadays, especially with the more kind of YouTube culture, I guess, or more digital videos, sometimes the style can be that they're going for a little bit more cutty or a little bit more modern, I guess you'd say, and
Yeah.
not necessarily the classical transparent editing. But otherwise, if they're going for just your traditional classical transparent editing, then you don't have to worry too much about throwing in a bunch of jump cuts and like quick cuts and like cutaways and things are different. We're putting it together to do that necessarily, but the guiding light really is the tone and the script. The script is always the guiding light, and so you read the script for each scene. You know what's the emotion, what are we trying to convey, what is trying to be shown from that, and let that be your guiding light when you put together your assembly. And then from there, usually a lot of what the director's looking for is kind of baked in by this time. They've baked it in with what they've shot, so much of what is on camera. The only thing you've really got to play with now, aside from really modern creative editing styles of super quick cuts and jump cuts and things like that to make the editing really obvious and make the editing part of the storytelling. If you're not doing that and you're sticking to classical, then you've pretty much got pacing and shot choice. And pacing, shot choice, and well, that's kind of about it in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And so, you can manipulate the pacing to help with the emotion of each scene. And then your shot choice obviously too helps with the emotion of each scene if you're far away or in tight and things like that. But if you don't have it, then you probably knew the director didn't want it from a wide angle if they didn't cover it, or if they don't have a close-up on it. Even if they did want it, they don't have it unless you can zoom in or stuff like that. And then it's a matter of if you have everything you need, then you can play, and you can really play with the shot, close-ups and wides, twos, or if you're going to play it all in a wide, or finding which way really plays the emotion the best. Yeah. But if you don't have it, then you're playing, kind of doctor a lot, and then you're just trying to make it work with what you have as best as possible.
Absolutely. Yeah, just having worked with various directors in the past, I could just see their, mindset. They all sort of want different things for their project. It's very interesting because you expect even when you just read a script or like even go on set from time to time. Some editors go on set just to kind of get a sense of what the project is like. But when you're in the editing room, I think in terms of editor and director, I think the key is just communication, making sure that you also have your kind of finesse to it. You have your expertise, but also at the end of the day, just have really good connection and communication with the director. See what they want. See what kind of feel they want, the style, the pacing, like you mentioned, etc.
Once you get to that point where you're like doing, revisions and you've got them in the room and you're doing directing sessions and stuff, it's all about communication. But at the end of the day, though, too, it's choosing your battles. If you have like a particular shot, when I prepare for a director session or a producer's session where they're actually going to be there, it's always good to have a few takes. If there's something that you're not sure about, or you think there's going to be a line that they're going to want to see, make sure to, queue up 2 or 3 takes of that exact line so you can quickly switch and things like that to show them their alternative options. They have that built into a lot of the software now, so it's pretty easy, but you do it so that you can quickly go back and forth, because that always looks bad if they ask for a different take and you can't pull it up pretty quick. So definitely have your stuff organized really well. And then if it ever gets to a point where they ask for something but you really, really like it, you want to have saved your chance, because you don't want to be questioning them on everything or they'll stop listening. You want to save that moment for that one part that it's like, this would work really well this way, and then you can kind of try to discuss it with them. But at the end of the day, it's always their movie and you're trying to bring their vision to life. But those are a few of the tricks when you actually got like a director in the room.
I love that. This is one of the questions that I actually ask some editors I know, and it's kind of a fun one. Would you rather have too much footage or not enough footage, and why?
That's a great question, actually, because I have had moments where, I think that's kind of I think I will say that's tough, because philosophically, there's a couple of things. if there's not enough footage, it forces you to be super creative.
Yes.
But also, if there's not enough footage, there's a good chance the director knew exactly what they wanted. And so you're working with somebody who knows what they're looking for. They might have not been able to get it for budget reasons, or it slipped
That's
they ran
true.
out of time or something like that. But at least the director has a good idea of what they want, which is why they didn't overshoot. And so in that sense, less footage can be, one, challenging, and two, you're working with somebody who can be more specific about what they're looking for. But too much footage can be great, because then you've got unlimited options and all these, maybe you could really polish it and you never have any visual hiccups or flash cuts or weirdness. But at the same time, there's a good chance that the reason the director has so much footage is because they have no idea what they want, and so they shut everything. So with that being said, maybe I'd go with not enough footage.
Wow, that's
because
very interesting.
working with a director who doesn't know what they want is really difficult.
Yeah. I would totally agree that both have their own pros and cons. And, even though there are circumstances where, let's say they don't have enough footage because they didn't have much time to shoot, right? So they're like just stuck with what they have. But at the same time, too much footage is like, what if even a chunk of that too much footage is not even usable? You know what I'm saying? So it goes both ways. I would go for too much footage, just because even though there's a chance for the footage to not be good, like for the most part, there's a chance that they shot so many different takes because maybe the director wasn't happy with a lot of the takes. But it forces me to be creative and also have room for continuity errors, a lot of room for mistakes. But it could go vice versa. Maybe sometimes I don't want to deal with too much footage. So that's such an interesting question that I had in mind.
That's a great question.
Yeah. Can you share any memorable challenges you faced in your post-production career? Maybe problems that occurred in the past, maybe some unexpected things like, oh my God, where is this? It just disappeared, or anything.
Oh, well, there's it was a challenge / scary moment on my short film. For instance, I dropped the hard drive. And this was before I had really learned my lesson. Now I am very, very, very like, how do you say, like, I want to say like militant. I'm very, very like on backups all the time. I'm very like, at this point, I have a time machine on my computer at all times, and my RAID system always has a backup running, and every hour it's backed up. So it's like, plus the important stuff's in the cloud. So I have learned my lesson, but I almost lost all the footage from my film.
No way.
I was going to be really screwed, but luckily my DP was much more experienced and brilliant and smarter at it than me, and so she had it all backed up.
Oh, there you go.
That saved the day, but that was a very scary couple of days before I found that out.
Wow.
And then so many of the challenges I've had in post-production a lot of times have been from data mismanagement, not from me, but from other people in the production chain that have caused issues like dropped hard drives or didn't have enough storage or, stuff like that. And then, but probably aside from data woes, it's just time. Like a lot of times, in post, they kind of, we'll fix it in post, but we need it by Tuesday at 3. It's like, but you got what? And so the time, you put a lot of time into it. One fun project I had a few years ago was they came to me and they're like, okay, we got this deadline. The client needs these 14 videos, and it was like quick instructional type videos on how to do their online course. And they need them by next Tuesday, basically, at like 3. And this was like a week before. We just finished. We're gonna film the interviews and stuff now, and we just help.
Help.
So basically, I ended up being like, all right, we can do this, but we're gonna need the entire, all 5 of us. I need at least 3 other guys on this, and there's not going to be any time for reviews. There's not going to be any time for notes. So,
Nope.
like it or not. And basically, yeah, we pushed and we pushed. We worked like 12-hour days. Like, what am I talking about? Like 16-hour days. We like worked for it was 80 hours in like 1 week. And me and three other guys, like late nights, a lot of Red Bull and walks to 7-Eleven. And then we got it done like Tuesday at, I don't remember the exact time. So if it was due at Tuesday at 3, we got it done at Tuesday at like 6 in the morning. And then they gave like 300 notes.
After that, oh my.
Yeah, it was like, because it turns out they had bought an extra day, I guess, or something like that, after like having us work to the bone to do it.
Oh my god, that's a lot of hours.
Challenge.
Wow. Did you get it done though? After
Yeah,
the
we got it
notes?
done, and they
Okay.
got it turned in, and it came out, I think, quite well, especially compared to what they had turned out before. I think it actually came out really well. But so we were able to kind of up the bar too while we did it. But at the same time, it was a hard push.
There you go. Yeah. The more hands you can get, the better. 5 guys in a team, and yeah, 16-hour days. Oh my god, that's a lot for sure. Yeah, mine would have to be just catering to the needs of the director. Not necessarily a particular one, but different ones overall, because just having worked with one as opposed to the other, they all have different needs, they all have different perspectives, and and now I just need to adapt to kind of what they want. So I think just the idea of communication with the director and just focusing on what they want, and also providing my creative input is I think is important. So wow, that's a lot of hours though, Bradford. Wow. I don't think I've ever done 16-hour days. Yeah.
A lot of 78-hour weeks on that one. But, well, that's what you're talking about, though. That's definitely a challenge in the editing, especially in the editing world, when you start working with different producers, creative, especially in advertising too. It gets really crazy because they can get they're all great. It's just they have very specific things they're going for because advertising is so precise in so many ways. But yeah, I always find that kind of a fun. I guess the way I always approach that challenge is I just look at it like, look, I'm here to help you make the best video or movie that you're trying to make. Mm-hmm. And if you come at it from that, like, I'm here to help you at all times, I think it makes the communication easier, and it makes approaching it easier. Just kind of taking that back seat and being, I obviously have my ideas on how to make that happen, and seeing the footage, knowing what they've got to work with, trying to take into account what their budget is, what the time is, what the deadlines are, what they need to accomplish, and give my best recommendation on how to do that. How can we get you from here to there with the money you have and the material you have and what you've shot and what you don't have time to get, et cetera, et cetera. But at the same time, always just trying to make their vision as best as possible. And then creatively, if there's something where, I might disagree, that's where I say choose those battles, right? If it's something where it's like, well, I would have done it this way, but that way works too. But then every now and then you'll come across something where it's like, no, this is the better way to do this.
Yes.
And it's like, you've kind of got to make your stand. But at the end of the day, if they really, really want to do it, then it's like, fine, that's what you want to do, but I've made my point, and I'm here to make your movie the way you want it, the best it possibly can be, and give you any suggestions. Kind of like, you're more of an assistant filmmaker in a way that way.
An assistant filmmaker. I love that. Yeah, because I just think that communication is such a vital role between editor and director. Just making sure that they have what they need, what they want, and what they desire. And I love what you said about, just giving feedback, as much feedback, even though we have disagreements. If that's what you really want, go for it. But, but sometimes maybe they change their mind. Maybe it's a thing or a note that you provided for them, and they think like, oh, this is a really good idea, maybe I'll do this approach. So I wouldn't be afraid of also giving your take on it, your opinion on it, because everyone's different, everyone has their own perspective. So for people who are starting out in the post world of editing, where you said long amounts of hours, like you said, what would you advise them? Would you tell them to, go to tutorials? Would you ask them to go to film school? Would you ask them to read as much as possible, or just maybe just practice? Like what would you advise people who are just starting out?
Well, first thing I do, and I still do this, watch movies. Like unless movies aren't what you want to watch, edit. I guess first off, kind of determine maybe what it is you want to edit. Because, for instance, editing YouTube videos and making YouTube stuff is a lot different editing style than making movies. Now, you can learn, and you should learn both, obviously. But if you're just starting, maybe really watch what it is that you are wanting to do. And yeah, one, get really familiar with the basics, get familiar with the software, pick any one of them. I would obviously recommend the one that doesn't cost any money.
Yeah,
which is only one of them at this point. And that's the best one. But yeah, learn. But it doesn't matter the software really, because a J cut's a J cut, an L cut's an L cut, a cut's a cut. Learn what those mean. Read some books on editing. There's a bunch of them out there. Read books on editing, read books on filmmaking, read books on everything. Just learn as much as you possibly can about how films are made, about the editing process. Just always be a sponge for all of it. And then, yeah, at this point in time, it's so easy to just shoot something on your phone and start editing.
Yeah.
And really, if you're that's where it kind of becomes a little difficult, because on one hand, it's easier to kind of maybe just start editing if somebody else has given you all the footage and you want to start editing that. But there's not necessarily a ton of resources for those sorts of things. So then you have to make your own stuff. But then if you're going to make your own stuff, then you have to learn a little bit about camera angles and mediums and close-ups and like what kind of stuff that does and doesn't do. And then you can go shoot and make your own footage. So, but if you want to really focus in on editing, I'd recommend going to like Film Pack or something like that, where you can get stock footage that's been shot from different angles and different stuff, and then you can kind of edit those things together. If you want to get footage that gives you really high quality footage with multiple, levels of wide and medium and close up and stuff like that. And yeah, so I think the number one thing though, probably watch movies, learn a little film theory. You don't have to go to college for this kind of stuff anymore. You really don't. Really, to be honest, school that's a place you go to make connections and to have the paper that says you learned it from here or there, And if you can do it, you can afford it, then by all means, there's a lot of stuff you can learn at college, both for life and for filmmaking. But if you don't, there's so many resources out there now. But one of the first things, get a real handle on the basics of editing and the basics of film language. And what I mean by that is close-ups versus medium shots versus wide shots. What's the difference? What's the difference in how they make you feel? What's the difference in the kind of emotional information they convey? What's the difference you get from going from one to the other? Because one of the big things about editing is juxtaposition. What kind of information are you giving in the cut? In other words, you're going from a wide crashing into a super close-up. Why did you do that? Is it giving you a lot of information, but it will jar you? Did you want it to jar you? You might. It's like, you might not. You might want the edit not to be obvious, but if you do something that drastic, the edit's going to be obvious, but you might want the edit to be obvious. And start, these are the languages of filmmaking. And watch other people who have done it. See, when you watch a movie that you really loved, watch the cuts. Start really kind of dissecting and turn the sound off. See how it makes it work without the sound on. Stuff like that. To see how the cuts speak, because there's a pacing to the cuts, there's emotion, and there's information in the cut choice between different shots. And get a handle on what that language is, then you can start to speak it yourself.
Yes.
And then you practice on how to edit those things and put them together and try to create the emotion or the effect that you're going for.
Right.
Jump cuts nowadays don't hold as much sway as they used to, because YouTube cuts that way all the time, but they still are jarring. You'll notice them once you know about it. And even you'll see it. But that's probably the number one place to start, is learn the language of film editing. through watching
Absolutely.
stuff. Yeah.
That's awesome. And on top of that, one thing I really like to mention to other editors is, even though, like, let's say 1,000 people work on a single project separately. And one thing I am pretty sure, 100%, even 99% of the chance that happens is that everyone will edit that project differently,
You can say 100%.
in some
It will.
way. Yeah. It will not be the exact same frame for each one of them. It won't be the exact same transition or anything like that. And I think that speaks volumes. I think that everyone has their own style, everyone has their own take on the thing, on the project. And you were mentioning about like different decisions that people make in editing. Like, why did you choose this? Why did you do a wide shot instead of the medium? Why did you not do a certain thing, etc.? There's multiple ways to tell a story through editing. And I think that, even if you put 10,000 editors, they all have different takes on it too, which is something that I just found super interesting. But for people who are starting out just from scratch, like no experience whatsoever, like Bradford said, take advantage of the things that are free. Take advantage of the things that are accessible to you. There's a lot of online resources out there. There's a very solid editing software that is currently out and is also free. So just take advantage of all of the ones that you have. And sure, you can go to film school. Sure, you can pay for classes here and there. And I think that those are valuable resources that can really help you enhance your skills and potentially your career because of the connections you make. But at the end of the day, I think it's just, you're the one who's learning, you're the one who's getting better. Even though a lot of you are going to the same school, same class, you're all technically on the same level, but not really, because everyone has their own mindset, everyone has different passions, and everyone has different drives. So if you wanted more than others, even though you don't have as much experience, maybe like in the long run, you'll be more crafted than that person. So I would say even passion is a key to it, even with anything, not just editing. If you really have that passion and drive, then everything else will follow. But at the same time, you kind of need guidance as well. You need the fundamentals. You need the basics. You need the tools. You got to learn those, and you learn those from tutorials. You learn those from books, etc. But if you're just starting out, get the knowledge you need from the things that are already accessible, that are free. So that's what I would say. And given the fact that you were, Bradford, you're an actor and also an editor at the same time, how do you balance both of those in general? Because I know you mentioned that you worked on Mirrored, and you were basically both the actor and the editor. But sometimes you would work on various projects as an actor and various projects as an editor. Like, how do you balance both those fields?
Well, it's kind of, in a way, it'll balance itself in some ways, just based on you feel the opportunities that come your way. Luckily, everything is kind of project based in many ways. So you kind of divvy your schedule up as best you can based on what's coming in, and choose the best projects and things you can depending on what is available. As far as the pursuit, that can always kind of backfire on the acting side, unfortunately, because it means you might not be as available for auditions and things and stuff like that. And I've had that backfire on me once before, because I had an editing job, and then, that's a long story, but anyway, it can kind of get in the way. So for me, the real balance, though, has been producing and making kind of my own stuff, and realizing that I am going to be making my own stuff, and so that makes it a little easier for me to forego constantly auditioning, because I feel like if I'm not getting out there, I'm obviously not pursuing the acting. And if I full disclosure, I guess I now have 2 kids plus a job, so
Yeah.
the time to spread around is a lot less. And because of that, then I've decided to really go gung ho into producing my own stuff, knowing that I'm kind of like sacrificing a little bit right now for the bigger uh, pie later. But if I didn't have that mindset, then I would still probably be looking for ways to audition for as much as I can and try to get out there, and then take the time off to go shoot for that day and things like that. But yeah, once the kids are older, I'll probably start doing that again, to be honest. But and one, it's been a little weird the last few years, obviously, for everybody with the pandemic and that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
fielding it a little bit, finding it out a little bit as I go from all of that. But yeah, it's a difficult balance, though, to be honest. It ends up being that you work a lot.
Yeah.
You know,
On top of your 16 hours a day.
yeah.
Yeah, but congratulations, by the way, on your children. That's amazing. Like you mentioned, as an actor, it's such a difficult and competitive field. But knowing that you've had experience in the past when working on your own stuff, what tips would you provide for actors who are just starting out? I know we mentioned about the editor, but let's do actor now. Would it be going to classes? Would it be going to workshops? What advice would you give them?
Oh, definitely. When it comes to acting, the first, start with class. And there's so much stuff out there. You don't have to go to like a major college or anything like that. And you can get started in high school. I started in theater and stuff in high school, and then move. Well, now if you live in a city like Los Angeles or someplace like that, there's tons of opportunities outside of your school to get into things that way. And yeah, that's acting. The number one thing is kind of learning yourself more than anything. Because a lot of people think acting is about being able to lie really good. It's actually the exact opposite. Acting is about being able to tell the truth really well, the emotional truth of your character. And so finding the ability to do that and knowing where you're coming from. And there's a lot of stuff you got to work through there. And then there's a bunch of, technical things to work on there. Get into a voice class. I highly recommend. One of the biggest things for me going through training in school that really helped me was a voice class, because it's kind of like learning your editing system. Once you really know where all the buttons are in your editing system, you can cut faster. Well, once you really know the tool of your voice and how to manipulate it and how to really free it and let it convey the emotion that you're trying to convey, because you're no longer held back by not having proper diction or using your vocal apparatus or breathing right and all these different things that are holding you back from being able to truly express your emotion. So I really have a lot of I would really recommend a voice class as one of your acting classes, but definitely just start with acting 101. Get in there, do some of the fun theater games, get started, get on your feet, have fun with it. See if you even like it once you get in front of other people, because if you get really shy and you don't love it, then you found out fast and you didn't really have to do it in the middle of a big play. And do theater, definitely do theater. There's so much community theater around. There's so many smaller theaters around wherever you are. And I'm a classically trained actor. I come from a theater background. I love theater. And it's much easier to learn to go from theater to film than it is to go from film to theater because of voice stuff. You learn a lot more about how to project and speak to a audience 30 feet away. And then you can pull that back, but you can't go the other way as easily. Obviously it's doable, but it's not as easy necessarily. So yeah, start with just acting 101, get out there, volunteer. If you want to do film acting, I recommend be an extra. Get on sets, see what they do, find out, just watch. I learned so much from doing extra work for a long time and just watching what they do, like how's the set work, who runs who are the people that wrangle this or do that, and just watch. You can learn a lot that way. But if you want to get into film, but yeah, so class, theater, voice class.
There you go. Wow, a lot of insight from that. What would you think are the differences like between theater acting and film acting? Because I've I don't have much theater experience or like working with theater, but like in film, you know, you do a take and you do multiple takes. But in theater, it seems like you don't have any takes. You just kind of have to adapt with whatever situation you're in. So, what do you think are the major differences between acting in both those fields?
Well, in a way, you have a take every night.
In a way.
6 shows back to back. You do like 2 on a Saturday and 2 on a Sunday, and then 1 every night. Every time you do a performance, it's another take. But it's a 2-hour take, but it's a take. And that's kind of the joy of it. You're finding it differently every night, and like that's one of the challenges though too, is to also do it the same every single time and do it with your whole cast. But you're right, one of the biggest challenges that people have a hard time, and I've experienced this with other actors directing them in some of my stuff. If they come from theater, they have a much harder or more difficult time. Sorry, if they don't come from theater, staying in a moment for a long time. Because as you pointed, film is like you're going to shoot 4 days, maybe. You might shoot like an eighth of the page. You might shoot like 2 lines. You might literally shoot a look for 3 seconds. The next, and that's, you got to get in character, which is its own challenge, by the way. That's one of the biggest challenges I experienced going from one to the other. So going from theater into film was finding the ability to get into character really fast and find those moments quickly and then do it again back to back without a lot of lead up. Because in theater, you have to be in character for 2 hours, and there's a whole nother method and way you find to get into that headspace to be in character for a 2-hour show versus finding a way to get in the headspace of being a character for 20 seconds, but do it every 5 minutes. And so it's its own challenge in that way. And then the physics of acting, the physical, like body, the language of your body in theater versus film is obviously one is much bigger, pronounced to be talking to, 30 rows back, or you're allowed and can be much smaller in film because there's a camera like 2 inches from your face, 2 feet. But so that's one of the biggest challenges too. If you come from theater and you're used to turning out to project, I don't know if you know this, but in theater you never face straight onto each other. You always turn out like this, so that even if you're literally in a conversation right next to each other, you actually have your body kind of turned out. It's so that you
towards the audience.
Yeah, towards the audience, and you can project, and it's the way of being seen by that many people. And so things like that you have to kind of overcome, and there's a difference in doing it. But yeah, and then that's why I guess I should say it depends on the person which one is more difficult for you. But it takes a little bit more training, I would say, in some ways, to be able to really project. Because that's a whole other can of worms when we get talking about the audio issues of modern cinema and how dialogue has gotten so quiet nobody can ever hear anything anymore. Why is because actors don't talk loud enough sometimes.
Or vice versa. Maybe the sound mixer doesn't even have the gain up. So
it's a few things, but that's one of them.
Yeah, I love that. I loved hearing that from you. And yeah, I was always interested because I never really got the chance to go to theaters too much. I always worked on film sets here and there, but I would watch theaters, and then there's a whole production that happens inside, whether they have like a lavalier mic or like they have mics on different places. But yeah, the fact that you mentioned you have to stay in character for the whole duration of the 2 hours, as opposed to the film when you said maybe you're just gonna be there for 5 seconds and then that's it, basically, without even saying a single word.
Yeah.
So that's something to consider for sure. But we're here in the final 3. So my first one would be, what do you think are the most important skills for an editor to have in the industry?
In the industry especially, one, organization. Be organized. That is huge. And a lot of times, I think a lot of the editors I've interviewed and stuff for different positions I see have, I think they rely a little too much on the software to kind of take care of that for them, or they think that it does. But don't rely on the software. Be very organized. have naming conventions, know about where to put your footage, like that. Just organization, file organization, project organization, because you start doing multiple versions, you start doing multiple variants, you do 6 variants and then 3 versions each, and each one's got a 9 by 16, a 16 by 9, and a 4:5, and you got to be able to find all these and then tell me which date it came from, who edited it, and like what version you're on.
Where is it?
Be very organized.
Yeah.
That's important. And it leads into being very detail oriented, which I think is important as well. And then outside of organization, then it's not like your style will develop on its own. You don't really have to have a quote unquote style. Like you don't have to go out and seek a style. You will have a style when you edit. It's just you learn the language of film, and everybody speaks the language a little different, has their own like way of pronouncing in the words they choose. Your style will be there, so you don't have to like force that. But don't be afraid to like show it, if that makes sense. So don't be afraid, don't hide it. Just give it your take, and if it works, it works. If it doesn't, let them give you the notes, and that's take notes. That's a really important one. Be able to, and I don't mean you take notes, I mean be able to take direction. And it goes into being organized. Keep the notes that they give you organized, and make sure you check them off, make sure you've done them, and make sure you take them in a positive way and be able to adjust and make the adjustment. And then, so we got organization, be able to take the notes.
I'm taking notes right now. So
I mean, you take notes. I mean, be able to take direction. That's a better way of doing it. Take direction. And then know the software, know the tools, because that helps you be quicker. And being quick isn't necessarily, I wouldn't say it's super important. I know a lot of times it gets very stressful when you're working and editing, that you feel like you're taking too long, or you got to get through this much, or you got to produce
or a deadline or anything.
A deadline and all that, and that is important. Don't get me wrong, that's obviously very important, but it gives you the confidence as an editor to be able to do it more if you're not constantly trying to remember how to do stuff or with your system. I say that on one hand, but on the other hand, be adaptive to other systems. Just be able to recognize the similarities, because all the editing systems are the same really at the end of the day. They just have slightly different ways of saying the same thing. And but I would even put that, honestly, I would put knowing your editing software really well is even farther down the list, because before that, emotional awareness, be able to know the good takes. That's super important. Have a good sense of timing, a good sense of emotional, emotions and the performance, and a good eye for a good take. Being detail oriented. Is the audio okay in that take? Is the camera out of focus? Things like that. I know it sounds rudimentary, but being able to spot all that stuff, and did it flip the line? Will it connect to the next one? So I would put detail oriented and emotional awareness, and being able to pick good takes at the top before knowing your system really well. And then, what was the last thing I was going to say? I remember the other thing I was going to say. I'll share.
For sure. Yeah, but you were talking about like learning the tools, and also knowing how to develop the story. I think it goes hand in hand with one another, because I know a few directors and editors who don't have either one. Like, for example, like if you're a director who wants a certain thing, or an editor who wants a certain thing, but you only know about the tools. Like, how do you even portray the story? Like, with all the, the assets that you have, like, how are you gonna work with that? Sure, you know how to, do a J cut or an L cut. Sure, you know how to do different VFX. Sure, you know how to do different things within the software. But if you don't know how to do the finished product justice, like, what's all that tools for? And same with vice versa. Like, I know a few people in mind who really see the film in their head already, like from scratch, like even just from writing the script to developing the story, they can already see the film in their head. But if you don't have the language or the things you want to say to your editor, like, what do you do? Like, if you don't know the tools, for example, like, Like, what do you do now? You have all these assets, but you don't know like how to click a mouse. You don't know how to know the shortcuts. You don't know how to do, certain things. And it really goes hand in hand, which is why I think editing is such an underrated art, because
invisible art.
Yeah, invisible art, absolutely. And for me, when I first watched the first movies in my life, I always thought acting. I always thought cinematography. Oh, that looks cool. And then also the direction of how the story is progressing. But I never really thought before about editing and how things are coming into play. Like, for example, when in a wide shot, one person's turning and the next shot is like an invisible edit of another person turning, or even like fight choreographs. I always thought like, oh my God, Jackie Chan, that's so cool. They're doing fight choreographies, like they're doing stunts here and there. But even just by like hearing it, all the sound effects that are involved, all the fast cuts, maybe not even fast cuts, maybe very slow, maybe an entire scene is not even edited, maybe an entire scene is basically one long shot that that's there. But now that I realize a lot of planning, a lot of strategic planning already went into that. And also, even the sound design is underrated for me. Like even hearing, for example, in a wedding scene, just hearing people in the background, hearing cheers, hearing stuff like that. I would say tools and story hand in hand go really well together. And the other thing on top of what you already mentioned was, you mentioned about, being able to adapt to certain situations and also troubleshooting certain things. Like if you run into different problems and you don't know what to do, like, how are you going to get it done? It's never going to be made. So what happens if you don't have a backup? What happens if your Premiere or DaVinci or Avid crashes, for example? What do you do now? Do you sit back and go, I'm done, I quit? Or do you try to fix the problem? There's a lot of problems that happen in the editing room, for sure. And it happens to most people. And and I think that preparation is also a key factor in that. And key preparation, and you mentioned organization, will solve a lot of those problems in the long run. So that's awesome that you mentioned about those things, Bradford.
Well, and you brought up a lot of really good points too, because you're right. Especially if you're doing more freelance stuff, you got to be able to troubleshoot your own stuff. If you're in a company, a lot of times you'll have an IT department or somebody who's kind of your designated guru. Being me at my place a lot. But the other thing I was going to mention, I remember the part, and you mentioned sound design, which also sparked my memory. Audio editing. One of the things that I feel a lot of people do but don't do is really get into audio editing and sound. Everybody does it. Everybody's like, I know it's there, I got to do it, and they kind of like mix, but a lot of times it's an afterthought. Make it one of your first thoughts, and really learn audio. That'll set you out from a lot of different editors if you really know your audio, how to mix, what levels you should mix to, what levels you shouldn't mix to, know your tools in an audio suite, stuff like that. It just helps you stand out from others, because a lot of times sound for editors is an afterthought. A lot of editors are good at editing, good at cutting, good at graphics or motion or titles, and sound is like, yeah, I do the sound.
Yes, so underrated.
Very underrated. And then the other thing you mentioned too, which is a very good point, and kind of goes back to when I was saying learn the language of filmmaking. Not just the visual language, but literally the language. Like learn about what a medium cut or a cowboy or a wide or a jump cut or a crash cut or a montage, and is it a diegetic montage? Learn all this stuff, because it gives you the language to try and express what it is you're saying or what you're trying to get. It gives you the language to communicate with your director. It gives you the language, if you're going to direct, to communicate to your editor. It gives you the ability, the vocabulary to kind of say the things that are really hard to express, which are the ideas in our head,
Yeah, as opposed to being like, I want this scene to be like this. Okay, how do you want to do it? If you don't know the language, it's gonna be hard for you to come up with the product that you want at the end of the day. Because if you're, I think if you don't have the language of an editor, like even in the back of my mind, like going back, like I know I knew the tools in the past, but I never knew the language before. But as soon as I found out from either reading books or going to film school, from working with different directors now it's easier for me to convey like my take on it, and vice versa whenever I'm directing or editing too. So I think that's so important, just learning the language.
The better you can express why you feel this shot or cut or sequence works better, the better chance you'll have to maybe get the director to agree with you, and vice, and not just in the technical language, but learn the emotional language. Like, this sequence is stronger, or it plays more powerfully, or it gives a much more, like, don't be afraid to express how it makes you feel, because at the end of the day, that's the language of what film is its emotion in a lot of ways. So
what about people who don't know the language? Like, what would you advise for them? Like, for example, the editor knows the language of filmmaking, but for example, the director wants to do a certain project, and it's just giving sort of the feel and the emotion of the movie, and kind of tells the story, but doesn't know necessarily the language of editors. How do you think that goes, and what advice would you give those people who don't know much about the language of editing or filmmaking in general?
Well, that's where I think metaphor comes in really well. And the best metaphor for editing and filmmaking is show me a movie that does what you want.
There you go.
Makes you feel the way, like, show me a movie you've seen that's kind of like what you're going for. And that is kind of a way to help convey. It's like, that's what lookbooks are for, for DPs, is to really give an idea of, like, this is what I'm going for, but I want it to maybe be a little cooler or brighter. But same thing, it's like, I like this way they cut it, but I don't want this part. And, be specific about what you like about whatever example you show. Don't just say John Wick, but which part of John Wick?
Absolutely.
Like, 1 or 4 is there's a big difference. So
yes,
be specific with your examples, but examples and stuff like that can really help when you don't have the words. Let maybe an example of what you want speak for you.
Absolutely, and I agree with that. If you don't know much about the language, be as specific as you can, but also give references. Like, is this something that a movie? Is this something from a movie in the past? Is this from a music video? Is it from a documentary? Where is it from? Like, where are you getting these ideas from? So yeah, if you don't know the language, just be as specific as you can, and that would definitely help a lot. But
always be specific, no matter what.
Always be specific, no matter what. There you go. Speaking of, what do you think are some of the most common mistakes that editors make? Because I know that mistake is very subjective, but but I think that there's still a lot of mistakes that happen, even with people who are seasoned veterans and professionals who have been doing this for over decades. You know what I mean? And they still do the same mistakes or new mistakes. What do you think they are?
Well, probably number one, putting sound off to the end and forgetting about it. So always remember that sound is super important, and take it as seriously as you take your video. Then organizational stuff, and that's so easy to do. I mean, when you're naming like 6 files a day, I get it. It's really hard. It's really nitpicky. It's very technical, and a lot of editors are incredibly artistic, and we don't like to do the technical nitpicky stuff, but you got to do it. It's incredibly important. So that's kind of one of the mistakes, is kind of ignoring the technical to only do the fun, creative stuff.
Yeah.
The technical will come to bite you back, and it'll bite you every time that you forget about it. Every time. At some point it'll come back.
Right.
So pay attention to that. Be organized, keep your system working, take care of the technical. Even if it's just, because don't zoom in on an HD piece of content all the way because it's not 4K. So it might look okay in your little window, but when it's on a big screen, you forgot about that. So, stuff like that, So be specific and be detailed. Be detailed. But yeah, I think probably those would be some of the biggest mistakes. A lot of the other stuff, I wouldn't really call mistakes. Everybody has their own creative way of doing stuff. But when I have a few editors that I work with who are, I manage and stuff. And a lot of times the things I don't really try to give a ton of creative notes because it's their style, it's their way of doing things. And a lot, they have a great way of doing stuff. And so it might not be the way I would do it, but it works and it's great. And as long as it's executed well, I'm like, go for it. So that's why I try to focus more on some of the details as far as the technical to try and keep it as polished as possible. And then, one thing that's always kind of I've seen sometimes as not a mistake, but again, it'll be like in your first round of notes, as long as you fix it, it's no big deal. Balance. What I mean by balance is keep in mind your composition, like from an art perspective, where your lines are in the frame and things like that. And especially if you're doing motion graphics and stuff, try to don't put all your text on the far right side and have like a blank space on the left side of the screen. Sometimes that'll happen. Somebody wants to make either an artistic choice or they just forgot to center it or stuff like that, or things. And it's mostly all just technical as far as mistakes. I don't really call your creative choices mistakes. It's just creative choices. Does it work for this or not? It might work next time. It's not a mistake to give it a shot. That's a great, bring your ideas, give it a try. If it works, great. If it doesn't, maybe the next time it works. So a lot of the mistakes are usually just technical ones. Don't ever, make sure you never, I'll finish it with this. QC your exports.
Quality control.
Your exports to make sure that there's no unrendered media or something like that in your exports.
Yeah, we don't want that
too often.
What if you don't even do a QC and then it's sent to a festival? They accept it either way, but they're like, "Ooh, there's a part there that says unrendered footage." There you go. You don't want that.
QC'd it.
Yeah, you should have QC'd it. That's so good, actually.
And that stuff happens, by the way. You laugh, but I've seen that happen more often than you might realize.
Absolutely. And I would QC with different people, not just you, who have a different eye as well. Maybe you're like sitting long hours, 16-hour, 18-hour days
you miss
in front of a computer.
Look like,
Yeah, and then you just miss it. So maybe a different set of eyes would also help. But it's interesting you mentioned a lot about the technical things in editing because editing is a technical thing. A lot of things happen technically in editing, but I would say one mistake that editors make is focusing too much on the technical skills rather than the creative skills.
Yeah.
Because, sure, how to do organizational skills, which is obviously very important. Like a lot of the fundamentals of editing are very technical. But if it stops there, where can you go? Now you need, I would say, creative input. Now you need to tell your story. Tell your story how you want to be told. With the technical expertise you have, now how do you want to edit, for example, Stranger Things? How do you want to edit Jurassic Park, like you said? Because, even though you mentioned that, the style kind of develops as you're practicing, I think that style is also important. I think that feel and emotion is important when it comes to editing. So that also goes with the creativity, like telling a story in many different ways. I mentioned about the 1,000 editors earlier who will have different, I guess, range of expertise in terms of technical skills and creative skills. But I would say if you focus too much on the technical skills, then you lose that kind of finesse. You lose that spark. You lose that emotion and drive of the story, I think. Because I know a lot of talented editors who edit so well, very efficient, very quickly. But but at the end of the day, for me, it's about the audience. Like, what do you want them to feel? You know what I mean? So I think that's very important. And then the technical skills that you said, like not backing up or not organizing, also plays a major role. Sorry, you were gonna say something?
No, absolutely. What you're talking about. See, nowadays I supervise for more of a marketing and like smaller video things,
Yeah.
but yeah, what you said reminded me of something that even I suffered with for quite some time. And when I noticed that I did it, it was a huge blind spot that was lifted, and I was very happy about it and about learning not to do it anymore. You're absolutely right. One thing, maybe slightly different than what you said, but one thing that I've seen myself do and other editors is you get so focused on the correct way to edit. We don't jump the line. You have to go from a wide to a close up, or you can't go from this cut to that cut, or these have to, they're not supposed to follow the rules of editing that you need to learn. You need to know them. But you get so caught up on those rules that if it ever becomes a question of pacing for the sake of the story and for the sake of the emotion of the scene, you might struggle or choose the technical rules. And I would say that's probably one of the biggest mistakes I suffered with myself at one point, and I still would, I'm sure many would, and that is the story comes first, the performance comes first. So therefore the pacing, the story, the acting, the best performance, I don't even care if you jump cut. I don't care if it jumps the line. Once I realized this, there's a big jump cut in Days of Thunder that I saw once, and there's a few in The Matrix and things like there's places where it messes up, but you never notice because the performance was perfect and the pacing was great. And so people will ignore minor issues with the rules, but they won't ignore minor issues with the performance. And so that is the mistake. That don't fall into that trap. Always remember the performance is more important, and even if there's a technical issue, that there's a jump cut or a line flip or anything like that, that's better to have than the wrong performance.
Absolutely, because it's what you see. You know what I mean? It's what you see and it's what you notice immediately on the big screen. So, yeah, great pieces of advice for editors out there. Even people who are starting out, and also seasoned veterans. I think that we all still have a chance to progress and get better at our craft, and also tell better stories in the long run, because, especially in this digital age where everything is constantly progressing, everything is constantly getting updated. Even cameras are getting updated, lenses are getting updated. Even editing, like the way editors' mindset works, is also changing, the styles. So very much taking everything into consideration. So yes, thank you so much, Bradford, for being here. I have one more for you.
Let's go.
If you could tell yourself when you were just starting out as a filmmaker, or maybe like in the past when it's just sparked in your head, oh, watching Jurassic Park, oh, I want to become a filmmaker, what advice would you give your former self?
I know that I'm not going to say change anything, because the way you really become a seasoned storyteller is to have all that life experience that flavors your take on life and on storytelling. And so everything that I've been through to get to where I'm at is incredibly necessary to be who I am. But I think probably the one thing I would say that kind of ties in with acting and editing is from the start, don't be afraid to be yourself. And I know that sounds cliche, but what I mean by that more is don't be afraid to sell your style and your way of doing it. Because a lot of times when you're first starting off, I think that our idea is to get the job. It's like, you need me to do this? I can do that. I can do whatever you need me to do. Just give me the job. I'll do it. And really, what will work better for your own growth and then also marketability and all of that is to say, well, I can do the job, but this is kind of how I would do it. And if they don't like it, don't let that make you feel that you don't know what you're doing or that you're not any good. It just means your style may not fit this particular place. And constantly trying to mold yourself into everybody else's vision is tiring and doesn't really pay off because it doesn't get you the job all the time anyways. So you
Yeah.
might as well have done it your way, felt good about yourself, shown your style, your ideas, your creativity, and if it works, then they hired you for you in the first place and for what you wanted to do. And instead of trying to constantly fit whatever it is you think they wanted out of you for the rest of the time.
Absolutely. And even though directors have their own take on things, still give your creative input, still give your own finesse and take on it. And I love that you mentioned about authenticity. I think it's such a valuable thing in this world because, you know, everyone thinks differently. Everyone is special in their own way. And I think that it's important for people to be themselves. So what a great piece of advice. I wanted to focus on, or I wanted to put an emphasis on speed though, because it's interesting because, you know, it's not necessarily so much about, you know, being fast at certain things, being a fast editor, like, oh my God, you can do this and that. You can do a rough cut in less than 30 minutes for a whole short film. But I think being a speed learner too, by acquiring all the resources you have that are accessible to you and not just relying so much on yourself to learn and practice. Like, for example, like if you're basically practicing the tools by yourself, like for example, you're given this software and you're basically told, okay, learn this and then play around with it. Because I get that a lot, actually. Play around with it, see what you think, and go about it, right? And I'm sure you've heard that too. Like, play around with it.
What did you come up with?
Exactly. What can you come up with? But I think that being calculated about learning, and that goes with my point about speed, is now that you have the tools, now that you have the software, now go online. Go watch tutorials. Go watch. There's a lot of free ones that are provided to colleges as well. Online, you just search it up. But also learn about things that cater to what you want to do, cater to your style. Not every editor thinks the same way. Not every editor, you know, basically hold the mouse or do, you know, shortcuts the same way. Everyone has their own different take on it. But learning, speed learning is something that really is important to me because it will get you ahead so fast and it will make you even a faster editor so fast. I think speed and power go well together. So that's one advice I would give to my former self because, you know, in the past I had, you know, I started with Windows Movie Maker and that was the only accessible one I had at the time. I didn't have money to pay for, you know, Final Cut Pro at the time, you know, because it's such an expensive software, you know what I'm saying? Yeah, so just take advantage of whatever resources you have and just go from there. And never stop learning. I would say never stop learning, continuously grow. So that's what I would say. Do you have anything to add to that, Bradford?
Oh, I agree. Never stop learning. Like if you don't know how to do it, know where to find it or know how to figure it out. Or where to look to find out. You know, there's so much information now. Wow, compared to when I started in this and coming up, learning it on my own through school and stuff like that. I mean, the amount of stuff that is available, both camera-wise and production-wise, but even just editing, what you can get now for not even having to find ways to do it. It's like I started on Final Cut, you know, but it was probably like a second-hand one or somebody had given me their old copy or something like that. You know, it was hard to get the computers. You had to have a really fancy computer. You couldn't get the software. It was really expensive. It was just so prohibitive. Everything out there now, so many tutorials, so many learning opportunities. You can take college courses on like Coursera or edX or all these things and all this different stuff. There's so many opportunities for zero or little money. There's no reason not to always be learning and keeping up with it. And it just changes all the time. So it's lifelong learning, constantly keeping up with it. And it keeps the passion alive and it keeps you sharp. Absolutely.
Awesome. That was so amazing. I love this episode so much and learned a lot from you, Bradford. And we're at time. So I wanted to give the floor to you. any shout outs or any projects you're going to work on in the future, or simply your social media platforms.
All right. Yeah. Right now, I'm actually not on much social media. I got off my
There you go.
social media, but I would definitely check out my short film if you ever want to watch a sci-fi film that I put a lot of work into, that is about an unwanted clone who has to fight for his right to survive. It's called Mirrored. It's on Amazon. Just search Mirrored. It should come up. Love to have you watch that. It's also on iTunes, on Apple TV. Then keep an eye out. I'm working on some new projects. I'm writing a script right now, so my goal is to be getting that moving forward. But it's probably going to still take a while because feature films take a while. But if you want to keep up with me, I think probably the best way is to find, wow, what is the best way? I should work on that. What's the best way? Because I was going to, find me on Facebook, follow me on Facebook. Because I'm not on Twitter, I'm not on YouTube, I'm not on Instagram anymore. Not really.
Yeah. And I would say Facebook is still a very valuable resource. So it's just Bradford Rex Hill, or?
I think that's, Bradford Rex Hill on Facebook. That'd be the best way.
And if people have any questions regarding, any piece of advice or like anything about editing or acting, feel free to reach out.
Feel free to reach out. You can always reach out or go to my website for my company, paragonhill.com. I think there's a contact there. Or it's just my name, Bradford, at paragonhill.com.
And are your projects there too, paragonhill.com?
Yeah, it should link you over to the Mirrored website.
There you go. Definitely watch Mirrored. Mirrored was such a fun watch. And I just want to thank you again, Bradford Hill, for being in this episode of The Howl. And thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.